The Wild West, the very phrase sparks images of vast, untamed landscapes and ruthless men who lived and died by the gun. It was a place of chaos and opportunity, where law and lawlessness blurred into one. Names like Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, and Wild Bill Hickok echoed through the annals of history, not as mere men but as larger-than-life figures whose legends have been immortalized in the folklore of America. These men were once the superstars of their time, revered and feared in equal measure, but the path to fame in the Old West was soaked in blood. Violence was their currency and death was their business. To survive, one had to be a skilled gunslinger, and on the western frontier, it didn't matter which side of the law you stood on. When the dust settled after a gunfight, the victor walked away, and the loser, well, they got a grave. The Wild West wasn't just a backdrop for these gunslingers. It was their stage, a theater of heroism and villainy where every conflict helped shape the cultural identity of America. The West's rugged terrain and lawless towns gave birth to stories of good versus evil, honor versus corruption, and survival versus extinction. These stories became the foundation of American folklore, endlessly retold and adapted in books, films, and television. Yet, beneath the romanticized image of the lone cowboy stood a stark truth. These so-called heroes were killers, driven by ambition, greed, and the ever-present threat of death. The West was not a place for the faint-hearted. It was a place where men, often one gunfight away from an early grave, etched their names into history. Today, we delve into the lives of three of the most notorious figures of the Wild West, men who embodied the volatile spirit of the frontier. First, Wyatt Earp, a name synonymous with law and order, though his journey was far from straightforward. Born in Illinois, Earp's life began humbly, far from the violence that would later define his legacy. He moved westward, becoming a lawman in town after town, including stints as a sheriff, constable, and deputy U.S. Marshal. But law enforcement wasn't his only trade. Earp was a gambler, brothel keeper, and occasional bouncer, always chasing the next opportunity to make money. His ambition knew no bounds, and neither did his willingness to resort to violence when necessary. His fame was solidified at the O.K. Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, where he, along with Doc Holliday and Virgil Earp, faced off against the notorious outlaw gang, the Cowboys. It was a showdown for the ages, one that left 3 cowboys dead and the survivors fleeing for their lives. When the dust cleared, Earp's reputation as a fearless lawman was cemented. His story, chronicled in his autobiography Wyatt Earp, Frontier Marshal became a bestseller, and Hollywood has since turned his life into legend. From the silver screen to the pages of history books, Wyatt Earp's name has become inseparable from the mythos of the American West. On the opposite side of the law was Billy the Kid, a man whose very name strikes fear into the hearts of lawmen. Born William H. Bonney, Billy's life was a tragic one. Orphaned at 14, he quickly turned to a life of crime, stealing horses and gambling to survive. His notorious career as an outlaw took off when he killed a man in Lincoln, New Mexico, setting off a violent spree that would see him kill 8 more men in cold blood. Billy became infamous for his ability to escape capture, and his legend grew as a wanted fugitive with a $500 bounty on his head. Sheriff Pat Garrett would eventually catch up with him in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, putting an end to his short, bloody reign. But even in death, Billy's story refused to fade. Rumors persisted that his death had been faked and that he lived out the rest of his days in obscurity. Whether he died young or lived on in secret, Billy the Kid remains one of the most infamous outlaws of the Wild West, a symbol of rebellion and lawlessness whose story continues to captivate audiences in film and television. Perhaps no gunslinger's legend is as enduring as that of Wild Bill Hickok, the man who may hold the title of the deadliest gunfighter in all of the West. Hickok's life reads like something out of a dime novel, full of gunfights, gambling, and adventure. He carried his iconic Colt 1851 Navy revolvers with ivory grips, worn in a unique style known as cavalry draw, which was a forerunner to today's cross-draw holster technique. Hickok was a man of many talents, having worked as an actor, scout, soldier, spy, and lawman, among other professions. His flair for the dramatic, combined with his lethal skill with a gun, made him a legend in his own time. One of Hickok's most famous duels was with Davis Tutt, whom he shot dead from 75 yards away, an astonishing feat of marksmanship that still impresses to this day. But for all his accomplishments, Hickok's lifestyle would eventually catch up with him. He was gunned down by Jack McCall while playing a game of five-card stud, holding what would come to be known as the dead man's hand, a pair of black aces and a pair of black eights. Even in death, Hickok's legend grew, immortalized in countless films, books, and stories that continue to fascinate generations. And then, there was King Fisher. Born north of Dallas, Texas, in 1853, Fisher was a man who, like the others, lived by the gun. His life, though less widely known than that of Earp, Billy the Kid, or Hickok, was no less filled with violence and notoriety. In a land where survival often depended on who could draw their gun faster, King Fisher made a name for himself, cutting a bloody path across the frontier and cementing his place in the annals of the Wild West. These men, through their deeds and reputations, helped define the Wild West as we know it today. They were gunslingers, some on the side of the law, others far outside it, but all of them were killers, shaping the violent, unpredictable world of the American frontier. Their stories continue to live on, capturing the imaginations of people across the globe. Whether through Hollywood's romanticized portrayals or the gritty historical accounts, the legends of Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, Wild Bill Hickok, and countless others are reminders of a time when the law of the gun ruled the land. The Wild West was a crucible of danger and opportunity, a place where men could rise to fame or fall into the dust with a single pull of the trigger. Among these men was John King Fisher, a figure who carved his name into history not through heroic deeds, but through violence and bloodshed. At just 18 years old, Fisher was arrested for horse theft, his first taste of the outlaw life. He served 2 years in prison, but when he was released, the wilderness of Texas awaited him. He became a cowboy, breaking horses by day, but Texas in the late 1800s was no peaceful place. Bandits roamed the land, raiding ranches, looting homes, and committing unspeakable acts. It wasn't long before Fisher found himself part of a posse, hunting down these criminals. It was here, amidst the dust and danger, that Fisher developed a deadly skill. He was quick on the draw, and even quicker to pull the trigger. In 1878, Fisher's reputation as a gunslinger was cemented in a violent confrontation with 4 Mexican cowboys. Legend has it that he, enraged by an argument, grabbed a branding iron and clubbed the nearest cowboy. When a second man reached for his gun, Fisher was faster, shooting him dead. In a deadly ballet of violence, Fisher spun around and gunned down the other 2 men, who had not even drawn their weapons but were unlucky enough to be sitting on the fence during the altercation. This brutal display of skill left no doubt, Fisher was a force to be reckoned with. He lived by the gun and, ultimately, he would die by it. In March 1884, during a quarrel while out with his friend Ben Thompson, a gunfight erupted. Fisher and Thompson were both mortally wounded, their reigns of terror coming to a bloody end on the streets they once ruled. Before his death, Fisher had openly admitted to killing 37 men, a number that sent chills down the spines of those who dared cross him. But King Fisher was not the only name to haunt the West. Another legendary figure, Bass Reeves, took a different path, though his journey was no less filled with violence. Born into slavery in Arkansas in 1848, Reeves' early life was marked by hardship. When the Civil War erupted, his whereabouts became uncertain. Some say he attacked his owner and fled to freedom, but whatever the truth, after the war, Reeves found himself on the right side of the law. He became one of the first African-American U.S. Marshals, and his reputation as a relentless, unyielding lawman spread across the frontier. Reeves was not a man to be trifled with. During his career, he killed 14 outlaws and captured more than 3,000 criminals, including his own son, who had fallen into a life of crime. Bass Reeves was a man of principle, a lawman in a land where lawlessness reigned. Many believe that he was the inspiration for the fictional character of the Lone Ranger, a testament to his legacy. Even after his retirement in 1907, Reeves continued to serve, becoming a city police officer in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and cementing his place in history as one of the greatest lawmen the West had ever seen. In contrast to Reeves stood Jesse James, one of the most infamous outlaws of the Old West. Born in 1847 in Missouri, Jesse's early life was marked by violence and rebellion. He and his brother Frank became guerrilla fighters during the Civil War, aligning themselves with pro-Confederate bushwhackers, a brutal band of raiders who terrorized Union soldiers and civilian abolitionists alike. The James brothers were accused of participating in the Centralia Massacre, one of the war's bloodiest atrocities, where Union troops were butchered without mercy. After the war, Jesse and Frank James didn't return to a peaceful life. Instead, they formed the James Younger Gang, a notorious group of thieves who robbed banks, stagecoaches, and trains. Jesse James became a symbol of defiance, a man who thumbed his nose at the law. But his reign as the king of outlaws would not last forever. Betrayed by one of his own gang members, Jesse was shot in the back of the head while straightening a picture on the wall. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy as one of the West's most notorious outlaws lives on. And then there was William "Curly Bill" Brashees, a man as infamous as his thick, curly hair. After the death of Old Man Clanton, Curly Bill became the leader of the Cowboys gang of cattle rustlers in Tombstone, Arizona. He was a heavy drinker, his behavior growing more reckless and dangerous with every sip of whiskey. One fateful night, while drunk and causing trouble with his gang, Marshal Fred White approached Curly Bill and demanded he hand over his pistol. In the midst of their exchange, the gun accidentally discharged, fatally wounding the marshal. Despite this, White made a dying statement, insisting that he believed the shooting was an accident. Curly Bill was acquitted, thanks in part to the testimony of none other than Wyatt Earp. But fate would have the last word. Years later, Wyatt Earp tracked down Curly Bill and, in a moment of cold revenge, shot and killed him, avenging the murder of his brother Morgan Earp. Not all gunslingers started out on the wrong side of the law. Sam Bass, for instance, began his life as an honest man. After fleeing from an abusive uncle, he worked in a sawmill in Mississippi before chasing his dream of becoming a cowboy in Texas. But life as a cowboy didn't suit him, and soon Bass turned to a life of crime. Along with a partner, Joel Collins, Bass drove a herd of cattle up north, sold them for $8,000, and instead of returning the money to the owners, the two men took the profit and gambled it all away in Deadwood. When their luck ran dry, Bass and his gang turned to stagecoach and train robbery. Their biggest score came when they robbed the Union Pacific Gold Train, netting a whopping $60,000, a heist that remains the largest in the railroad's history. But Bass's luck would not last. Wounded in a gunfight with Texas Rangers, he died 2 days later on his 27th birthday, his dreams of fortune shattered along with his life. Among the infamous gunslingers was a woman who defied the expectations of her time, Belle Starr, the Bandit Queen. Born Myra Maybelle Shirley, she grew up in Missouri and was childhood friends with outlaws like Cole Younger and Jesse James. When her husband, Jim Reed, fell into a life of crime, so did she. Together, they planned daring heists and helped hide notorious criminals on their family farm. After Jim's death, Belle continued her life of crime, organizing robberies and fencing stolen goods. She was a master manipulator, using bribes and seduction to keep the law at bay. But her luck, like so many outlaws before her, eventually ran out. On February 3, 1889, just days before her 41st birthday, Belle was shot in the back while riding home from the general store. Her murderer was never identified, leaving the mystery of her death as enduring as her life of crime. And finally, there was Thomas Coleman, Cole Younger, whose life was forever changed by the murder of his father at the hands of a Union captain. Already a member of Quantrill's Raiders, a Confederate guerrilla group, Cole joined the Confederate Army after his father's death, seeking revenge and finding it on the battlefield. After the war, Younger turned to a life of crime, becoming a key figure in the James Younger Gang. His name was first mentioned in connection with a bank robbery in Kentucky, and from there, his legend grew. In the heart of the rugged, lawless frontier of the Wild West, the story of Robert Leroy Parker, later known as Butch Cassidy, began in 1879. At just 13 years old, Parker lived on the ranch of Jim Marshall in Circleville, Utah, alongside his family. It was there that he met a man who would change the course of his life, Mike Cassidy. Cassidy became a mentor to young Bob, teaching him the art of shooting and bestowing upon him his first gun. Little did either of them know that this mentorship would pave the way for Parker's notorious career. Years later, in tribute to his friend, Parker would take the name Cassidy, forever linking his identity to the outlaw life he would soon embrace. Butch Cassidy's early run-ins with the law seemed innocent enough, the kind of story one might expect from a mischievous teenager. On one occasion, he rode into town looking for a new pair of overalls. Finding the general store closed, Cassidy helped himself, leaving a note promising to return and pay for the goods. But the store owner, not sharing Cassidy's casual approach to commerce, reported him to the sheriff. Though Cassidy was acquitted, it was a small taste of the tension between Cassidy and the law, tension that would escalate dramatically in the years to come. By June 24, 1889, Cassidy was no longer a boy with a mischievous streak but a full-fledged outlaw. Along with 3 others, he orchestrated a daring robbery of the San Miguel Valley Bank in Telluride, making off with a staggering $21,000, an astronomical sum at the time. With this ill-gotten fortune, Cassidy purchased a ranch near the infamous Hole in the Wall hideout, a notorious refuge for outlaws. It is widely believed that the ranch was little more than a front for Cassidy's ongoing criminal enterprises. By 1896, Cassidy had assumed leadership of the Wild Bunch, a gang that included some of the most feared outlaws of the time, such as the Sundance Kid. Together, they blazed a trail of crime across the American West. As with so many figures from that era, Cassidy's fate remains shrouded in mystery. Some say he died in a shootout in Bolivia. Others insist he returned to America, slipping into obscurity. Whatever the truth, his legend remains one of the most enduring in Western history. Equally shrouded in myth and controversy was Tom Horn, a man whose name still evokes debate more than a century after his death. Born in 1860, Horn was a gunslinger of unparalleled skill. His career began as a hired gunman during the infamous Lincoln County War in New Mexico, where he worked for cattle baron John Chisholm. Horn's proficiency with firearms, combined with his cold, relentless nature, made him a feared adversary. His ruthlessness earned him the nickname Tommy, and he quickly became a figure to be reckoned with. It was Horn's later career as a Pinkerton detective that solidified his place in the annals of the Wild West. Unlike many lawmen of his time, Horn had little regard for the letter of the law. He was willing to bend or break rules to get the job done, earning both admiration and condemnation in equal measure. However, it was his involvement in the murder of a 14-year-old boy, Willie Nickel, that truly sealed his legacy. Horn was convicted and executed for the crime, though many believed him to be innocent, a scapegoat for the powerful cattle and mining interests that dominated the region. To this day, Horn's story remains a subject of fierce debate, a testament to the murky and brutal realities of life on the frontier. Then there was James Miller, known as Killin' Jim, a gunfighter and assassin whose exploits were both terrifying and legendary. Born in Van Buren, Arkansas, in 1861, Miller grew up in the rough and tumble world of the Texas frontier. By the age of 19, he had already committed his first murder, shooting and killing his brother-in-law after a heated argument. Thanks to a legal technicality, Miller escaped a life sentence, and from there, his violent career only escalated. Miller's next victim was lawman Joe Townsend, further cementing his reputation as a cold-blooded killer. Miller's life was a strange blend of law and lawlessness. He became a saloon owner and even served as a lawman in Pecos before joining the Texas Rangers. However, the lure of violence and money proved too strong. He eventually became a professional assassin, taking contracts to kill men for a price. His downfall came in 1909 when he was arrested for a murder that left witnesses alive. The townspeople, fearing another acquittal, took matters into their own hands. On a fateful night in April 1909, a mob broke into the jailhouse, dragging Miller and 3 of his cohorts out to be lynched. While the others begged for their lives, Miller remained defiant to the end. He made 2 final requests: that his diamond ring be returned to his wife and that he be allowed to wear his black hat as he faced his execution. The mob granted both requests. With his final words, "Let her rip," Miller jumped off the box voluntarily, embracing death as boldly as he had lived. His body, along with the others, was left hanging for hours until a photographer arrived to capture the moment, immortalizing the brutal end of one of the West's most notorious gunfighters. In the world of outlaws, few could rival the fame of Butch Cassidy, the skill of Tom Horn, or the cold-bloodedness of Killin' Jim. Yet, their stories are just a small part of the tapestry of the Wild West, where every man had a gun, and every day could be his last. John Wesley Hardin, born on May 26, 1853, in the untamed lands of Texas, was no ordinary outlaw. From a young age, Hardin developed a reputation that would make him one of the most feared gunfighters in the Wild West. Raised during the turbulent years of the Civil War and Reconstruction, Hardin harbored a deep-seated hatred toward both black people and Union soldiers, which fueled much of his violent behavior. His first kill, at the age of 15, was an ex-slave, a death Hardin claimed was in self-defense, though many believe it was far from justified. This brutal act marked the beginning of a life steeped in violence, gambling, and lawlessness. Hardin's proficiency with a gun was unparalleled. Between 1868 and 1877, he is believed to have killed at least 21 men, though some estimates go even higher. His victims were not just nameless outlaws or random foes. Among them were 8 Union soldiers and 4 black policemen, all of whom were attempting to bring Hardin to justice for the countless crimes he had committed. His anti-Union and racist sentiments led to a series of bloody confrontations, with Hardin always emerging victorious, his gun faster than anyone else's. He became a symbol of the violent South, a man whose hatred fueled his legend. Despite his many killings, the law finally caught up with Hardin in Pensacola, Florida. In 1877, he was arrested and extradited back to Texas, where he faced a litany of charges. In September of that year, Hardin stood trial and was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his crimes. Behind bars, his reign of terror seemed to have come to an end. However, Hardin's story was far from over. After serving 17 years, he was pardoned in 1894 and released from prison. With his newfound freedom, he sought to rebuild his life, moving to Gonzales, Texas. But even as he tried to start anew, the shadow of his past loomed large. Just 1 year later, while standing on the porch of the Acme Saloon, Hardin's life was abruptly ended when he was shot in the back of the head by a former rival. The life of one of the deadliest gunfighters in the West was extinguished in an instant, fittingly by the very violence that had defined it. In stark contrast to the lawless life of John Wesley Hardin was that of Annie Oakley, a woman whose skill with a gun rivaled any man's but who chose a far different path. Born on August 13, 1860, in Greenville, Ohio, Oakley was raised in a humble, struggling family. From a young age, she displayed an extraordinary talent for marksmanship. At just 8 years old, she made her first kill, a squirrel, shot cleanly from her porch, providing much-needed food for her family. Instead of turning to crime like so many others who possessed her remarkable skills, Oakley used her abilities to help her family survive. By hunting and selling game, she was able to put food on the table and even paid off her family's mortgage. Annie Oakley's life changed forever when, at the age of 15, she faced off against the nationally recognized sharpshooter Frank Butler in a shooting contest. Not only did she defeat him, but she also captured his heart. The two married the following year, and their union would last a lifetime. Together, they toured the country, with Oakley dazzling crowds with her unmatched shooting skills. Her talent was so extraordinary that even the great Lakota Sioux leader, Chief Sitting Bull, was captivated by her. After witnessing one of her performances, he adopted Oakley and gave her the name Watanya Cecilia, meaning Little Sure Shot. The nickname was a perfect reflection of Oakley's prowess, as she could hit a target with deadly accuracy in the blink of an eye. In 1898, as the specter of war with Spain loomed, Oakley's patriotism and confidence in her abilities shone through. She wrote a letter to President William McKinley, offering to raise a company of 50 female sharpshooters to fight in the impending conflict. While her offer was not taken up, it remains a testament to her unshakable belief in her skills and her willingness to stand up for her country. The outlaws of the Old West were fortunate that Oakley never became a marshal, for there is no doubt she would have been as deadly as any lawman or lawbreaker of the era. Annie Oakley was, without a doubt, the quickest and sharpest shot of her time. Though she didn't live the life of an outlaw, her skills with a gun rivaled even the most feared figures of the Wild West. Her life, marked by honor, skill, and resilience, stands in sharp contrast to the blood-soaked careers of men like John Wesley Hardin. In her hands, a gun was a tool for survival and sport, not a weapon of violence. As we wrap up today's episode, we're reminded of the many ways in which the West was shaped by those who wielded guns, whether for good or for ill. Thank you for joining us for this journey through the lives of some of the most fascinating figures of the Wild West. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when we release our next story. Stay tuned for more adventures from the untamed American frontier.